What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, and today it's Wild Card Weekend. It's been a lot of fun watching this football around the league. Unfortunately, of course, New York Giants not in the playoffs. No surprise there. But how do they get back to the playoffs? Well, first and foremost, they have to have a great 2025 offseason. And the offseason is what we're continuing to preview, looking ahead to April's NFL draft once again in today's episode. And I want to take a look at one player that a lot of you have commented about in the comment sections. You've asked us to discuss. So I want to take a look at defensive tackle out of Michigan, Mason Graham. Now, I know that a lot of Giants fans might initially hear that and say, hey, why are we talking about a defensive tackle in the first round of the draft? And I understand that it might be a little bit confusing at first because the Giants do have Dexter Lawrence, but I'll walk you through my process here, my thought process on why I think he could be an intriguing selection for the Giants in the first round, whether that be at number 3 overall or in a potential trade down scenario. So how did we get here? Let's go ahead and start. Giants picking number 3. We know that there's a great chance that they're unable to draft a quarterback with the 3rd overall selection. We know that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are very likely to fly off the board at picks 1 and 2, with 2 quarterback needy teams in the Titans and the Browns selecting ahead of the Giants. So where does that leave Big Blue? With number 3 overall, they could then go best player available. Now, we've talked about it before, Alex and I have. Maybe they reach for a quarterback. Maybe they trade up. There's definitely a bunch of different ways that they still could land a quarterback in the first round. It just takes one of those top 2 teams to pass on Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, fall right into the Giants' lap. But let's assume for a second here, quarterbacks go 1-2. Giants are picking number 3 overall, and they want to take the best player available. Obviously, everybody's going to say, well, that's Travis Hunter. Go ahead and take Travis Hunter. But there is an argument to be made for a few of the other prospects. I would personally say Hunter is the best player available at that point, if that's how the board falls. And I would probably lean towards taking him if taking the BPA strategy. However, there could be an argument for a guy like a Mason Graham. He's a 3-down defensive lineman. He's a great run stuffer. He's an even better pass rusher in terms of his upside. He's been all over the place on Michigan's defensive line, playing the 3-tech. He's gone over the nose. He's played all over the place on the interior of Michigan's defensive line, has had 2 back-to-back really solid seasons, including a national championship winning season in 2023, as we all know. And now this past season, he put up a career high with 3.5 sacks and looked really good once again. So he's expected to be a top 5 player in this upcoming draft class. PFF has him number 4 on their big board. And so I do think it's worth noting the potential scenario where the New York Giants take him and discussing what Mason Graham could do for this defense. And let's first and foremost talk about Dexter Lawrence, because I think a lot of fans are going to say, we've got Dexter Lawrence, we don't need another defensive tackle. However, Dexter Lawrence is coming off of a season where he had season-ending surgery on his elbow. So we do need to keep that in mind and consider he might be hurt going into next year, a little bit banged up. The Giants need more depth on the defensive line, but that's the real key that I want to discuss. Depth on the defensive line was lacking for the Giants this past season. I mean, they really struggled to stop the running attacks against really every offense that they faced. When Dexter Lawrence was off the field, it was an absolute nightmare in some of those games. And even when Dexter Lawrence was on the field, the guy next to him wasn't pulling their weight, whether that was Raheem Nunez-Roche's, Nacho, when he was on the field, whether it was Elijah Chapman, again, another guy who's a good pass rusher from the interior, really not too good against the run. There were a few other guys who got out there and played alongside Lawrence or played in place of Dexter Lawrence when he was injured, but none of them were very good at stopping the run. None of them actually looked like legitimate long-term starters. So there is a world where you look at this defensive line for the Giants and you say, we need to build through the trenches. We need to focus on the offensive and the defensive lines. And if you're going to do that, when you're picking number 3 overall, Mason Graham being this prospect who has Pro Bowl potential, if you go over to the Draft Network, they have him with a first-round grade and a Pro Bowl potential grade. They think he can be a great player. So does Pro Football Focus. They've listed Mason Graham as a guy who has all-pro upside. He's a player who immediately upgrades the New York Giants defensive line. And we've talked about this before. When you add some pieces on the interior of your D-line, it helps your edge rushers as well. Having Dexter Lawrence and Mason Graham, 2 really good run defenders and pass rushers on the interior, makes things easier for Kayvon Thibodeau, makes things a lot easier for Brian Burns. It's less double teams for those edge rushers and more pressure coming from the interior. And if you actually look at metrics around the NFL on quarterback play, the pressure that affects them the most is interior pressure. So pass rushing right up the middle, that is what disrupts the most passing plays in the NFL. Edge rushing play is obviously important, and it's a premium position, the edge rusher position. But if you're really looking at what disrupts quarterbacks the most, get some good pass rushers up the middle, and that is a great way to shut down some quarterbacks. Meanwhile, it's also adding another run defender to slow down the run if you're the New York Giants. So I think there is an argument to be made for Mason Graham, but can you take him at number 3? Is that justifiable for the Giants? Maybe not. I know I kind of made the argument for it there. You want to create this deadly duo and pair Dexter Lawrence with Mason Graham, but I'm going to make the argument that at number 3 overall, it's a little too rich for my liking. So I do want to kind of discuss trading down and drafting Mason Graham and how attractive that option would be to me. But before we do so, I want to take a look over at BetUS and discuss some of the lines for tonight's game, Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus Washington Commanders. I was thinking about going to that game today, but ultimately couldn't find tickets that I liked. So I'm going to just stay at home, watch it from the couch like most of you, and try and win some money on this game. Over on BetUS, I'm taking a look at these lines, and I got to be honest with you, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home, their line is 26.5 points. I'm going to take the over at minus 125 on Tampa Bay Buccaneers points. If you're looking at what the Buccaneers offense did this season, first of all, in their last 2 games, they cleared this line. They missed it the game before that, but then the 3 games prior, they hit that line. So they've been going over this line consistently, and they averaged 29.5 points per game throughout the regular season as an offense. So I really like this line. I think the Bucs are easily going to go for 26.5. I'm going to go ahead and take the over at minus 125, throw $10 on it, and hopefully tonight while I'm at home watching this game, I make a little bit of cash and hopefully see the Washington Commanders get bounced in the first round, because I don't want to see anybody from the NFC East make a deep playoff run if it's not the New York Giants. So that's my bet for today, guys. Make sure you let me know if you're tailing, and make sure you go check out BetUS, the sportsbook with the fastest payouts in the industry, and use code YouTube150 for a 150% deposit match up to $2,000. BetUS, go ahead and check them out. Back to Mason Graham and the potential of the New York Giants drafting him. So, as I've mentioned, really like him as a prospect. He's disruptive, high ceiling as a pass rusher. He's a great 3 technique, which is what the Giants need. They have a nose tackle in Lawrence, but they need a guy next to Dexter Lawrence who can disrupt the passer and stop the run. He's very good at all of these things, technically sound, but is number 3 overall too early to take a defensive tackle. Again, I made the argument that maybe you can make the argument for that selection. I'm now going to make the argument against that selection. When you have the needs that the Giants have, taking another interior defensive lineman, it's not necessarily a premium position. When you're picking number 3, you better take a premium position. Cornerback is that. That's why you can make the argument for a Will Johnson out of Michigan as well, or for Travis Hunter. Quarterback is obviously a premium. If the Giants have the opportunity to draft a QB, they're going to. Wide receiver is a premium. Defensive tackle, yeah, I mean, if you've got a Dexter Lawrence, that's a premium player, but it's not necessarily a premium position. So my argument for the guys who want Mason Graham on the New York Giants, if you really want the Giants to draft this kid, you're like, that's the most can't-miss player, which honestly, he might be one of the most can't players in the first round of this draft, which is why we're even talking about him. The ceiling is high, but the floor is so high for him. But I think that if you can trade down a few spots and still draft Mason Graham, that is a great strategy for the Giants to consider, because if they're able to get down from pick number 3, let's say they only trade down a few spots. Let's go to pick number 6. And with the 6th overall pick, the Giants then draft Mason Graham. Well, to move down those 3 spots, they're probably at least getting an additional 3rd round pick for moving down 3 spots. Now, that's where you have to have this value argument. Is it worth it to have Mason Graham plus an extra 3rd round pick versus, of course, Travis Hunter? Which one would you prefer? And I know a lot of you are probably going to say, well, Travis Hunter, I mean, he's an absolute superstar. He's got gold jacket potential. But Mason Graham could also be an all-pro level defensive lineman, pairing with another all-pro defensive lineman that you already have, which gives you one of the best interior defensive lines in the NFL, if not the best, if Mason Graham reaches his potential. Plus, with that 3rd round pick, I mean, a lot of the times those guys can be instant impact starters. Drew Phillips was a 3rd round pick, and man, he far exceeded our expectations, looked like a legit pro from day one with the New York Giants. If the Giants were able to hit on another 3rd round pick plus a Mason Graham, the value might actually end up outweighing the immediate impact of a Travis Hunter. So there is an argument for a Mason Graham plus an extra 3rd or whatever the Giants would get in that potential small trade down that they would make. So whether that be spending that 3rd round pick on another receiver, giving another playmaker opposite Malik Neighbors for whichever quarterback is throwing the ball next year, or maybe it's an extra 3rd round pick that you use to then trade up into the back end of the 1st round, and that's where you draft a Jalen Milroe or a Jackson Dart, somebody else. Or maybe that extra 3rd round pick, you throw it right back into the trenches, not on the defensive line. Maybe you get a starting guard. I know the Giants tried to get a starting guard in the 3rd round in 2022 when they drafted Josh Azidu. It didn't work out. Maybe you try again, and if you hit on that guard prospect in the 3rd round, boom, now your offensive line is better, your defensive line is better, you're now winning on both sides of the ball in the trenches, and that's how NFL games are won, in the trenches. So If you're able to land a Graham and potentially an interior offensive lineman in round 3 because you traded down to get Graham, you might make this team a lot better in multiple regards overnight. The only thing is, Travis Hunter also makes you better in multiple regards overnight because he's not only an elite cornerback, but he's also an elite wide receiver. So it really just comes down to, do you want to draft Travis Hunter, or would you prefer to trade down and collect some assets while also taking the highest graded prospect available? And I think that it's an interesting question to pose, which is why I'm going to ask it of you guys. And I really do want to see your comments down below on this episode. I want to have a discussion on this one because I think there is a lot to discuss. I don't think it's as cut and dry as just take the best player available, Travis Hunter, no big deal. I think that there is an argument to be made for maybe trading down, collecting some assets, and also still taking a high-end prospect in the first round. It's something, at least for the Giants, to consider between now and the time we get to April. But Mason Graham, a really good player. Again, such a good defensive lineman, is versatile, can move around the defensive line, and he would really open things up for Dexter Lawrence, for Kayvon Thibodeaux, for Brian Burns, while also just being a damn good player himself. I think that he could be an instant impact rookie. So he is somebody. I mean, if the Giants were picking like 7th in this draft, I think we'd all be clamoring for Mason Graham, hoping that he falls down the board that far. But since we're picking number 3 overall, obviously we're looking for quarterbacks, or Travis Hunter is probably our backup plan. But if the Giants get an offer that they can't refuse to move down a few spots, Mason Graham would be that trade down target for me, at least one of the ones that I would consider. There's a few guys I would consider, but Mason Graham would be near the top of that list because of the way that he upgrades your defense immediately, open things up for the other guys around you, and the potential trade down allows you to collect some additional assets and really continue to build this New York Giants football team that has a lot of holes and not a lot of time to fill those holes. So trading down in the first round of this draft might end up being a very strong possibility for this Giants team as they look to collect as much talent as they can in one offseason so that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll can save their jobs going through 2025 and into 2026. But that pretty much wraps up this discussion here on Mason Graham, the New York Giants potentially trading down and targeting him. Again, I think it's interesting and worth considering. It's not my first option. If I had to pick and rank what I would like to see the Giants do in this draft, Mason Graham's not my number 1 option. I want to get a quarterback. If I can't get a quarterback, I will like a Travis Hunter. If the Giants don't go Travis Hunter, then I would like to see them trade down, collect some assets, and then Mason Graham would be on the table. But for now, I did think it was worth discussing Graham and just kind of talking about what he brings to the table. Again, good pass rusher, great run defender, a lot of upside there. And he really does upgrade a major position of need for the Giants because outside of Dexter Lawrence, the interior of their defensive line was an absolute mess this past season. So I'll continue to do this, just kind of break down in quick 10-minute episodes, all the different prospects for the Giants to consider, obviously in the first round. But as we get closer to the draft and the draft board starts to settle, we'll start talking about some of these guys in the middle rounds as well. I know you guys really liked my episode last week about Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe, kind of looking at mid-round prospects. We're going to continue to do stuff like that all off-season long on this channel, so stay tuned. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. Listen to Apple or Spotify. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Fireside Giants, powered by BetUS. We'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.